Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe podcast. We are so happy to have you here today. This podcast is a place where we explore big ideas in simple English so that you can learn, improve, and think more deeply about the world. Today, Julia and I are going to talk about a very important and interesting question. Will China replace the United States as the next superpower? This is not just a political question, but also a question about the future of our world.
That's right, Adam. And before we begin, dear listeners, we want to kindly ask you to support us. Please like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The English Globe. It helps us grow and bring you more educational content. Also, we would love to know more about you. Please tell us in the comments where you are listening from and share your opinions about today's topic. Do you think China will replace the US as the world's superpower? Or do you think the US will continue to lead?
This is such an important topic because it touches many areas of our lives. When we talk about superpowers, we are talking about countries that influence the global economy, technology, culture, and even the way we live. For the past several decades, the United States has been the leading superpower. Its economy, its military, and its cultural influence have shaped the modern world. But in the last 40 years, China has risen very fast, and many people believe it could challenge or even replace the United States.
Exactly. And the question is not only about who is stronger, it is also about how power works in the modern world. Being a superpower is not just about having the largest army or the biggest economy. It is also about leadership, innovation, culture, and the ability to work with other countries. So today, we are going to look at this question carefully, step by step. We will compare history, economy, military power, technology, and challenges. And we will try to explain everything in simple English so you can follow along and practice your listening skills.
Let us also remember that this podcast is not about taking sides. We are not here to say one country is good and the other is bad. Instead, our goal is to help you understand the discussion, learn useful English words, and think about how global politics affects your own life. By the end of this episode, you will have a better idea of what the future might look like, and you will also have learned new English expressions that you can use in your speaking and writing.
That's right. And this is also a good chance for you to practice critical thinking in English. Critical thinking means not just accepting information, but asking questions, comparing ideas, and forming your own opinion. So while we speak, try to think, what do you agree with? What do you disagree with? And most importantly, what do you think the future of global power will look like? Write your thoughts in the comments, because we would love to hear your ideas.
Now, before we dive into the details, let us take a moment to think about why the question of US and China matters so much. These two countries are the world's largest economies. They are leaders in technology, trade, and military power. The relationship between the US and China affects international peace jobs, education, and even climate change. So when we ask, will China replace the US? We are really asking about the future of the whole world.
That is a powerful point, Adam. And dear listeners, think about it like this. If the US stays the superpower, the global order may continue as it is now. If China becomes the superpower, the world may look very different. Each system has its own values, its own style of leadership, and its own way of dealing with problems. Understanding these differences helps us prepare for the future. And remember, learning English is not only about grammar and vocabulary, it is about connecting with the world. And this discussion is part of that journey.
So, dear listeners, this is our plan for today's podcast. We will start by looking at the history of US leadership. Then we will talk about China's economic rise, compare their military strength, look at their technology and innovation, and discuss their political influence. We will also talk about the challenges each country faces, and finally, we will share some possible futures. By following this path, we will try to answer the big question. Will China replace the US as the next superpower?
And as we go through these sections, please remember to interact with us. Like, subscribe, and share your comments. Tell us not only where you are listening from, but also how this topic connects to your life. For example, how do global changes in power affect your education, your job, or your country? By sharing your thoughts, you also practice English, and you become part of a global learning community.
Yes, that is the spirit of the English Globe. We want our podcast to be a space where you can learn, think, and connect. This topic is serious, but we will keep our explanations clear and simple. We believe that even complex global issues can be understood when they are explained in the right way. And of course, as you listen, you will improve your vocabulary, listening skills, and your ability to talk about world affairs in English.
So let us begin this journey together. Remember, this is not just about politics, it is about education, language learning, and your role as a citizen of the world. Stay with us, keep an open mind, and think carefully about what you hear. And again, dear listeners, do not forget to support us by liking the video, subscribing to the English Globe, and leaving a comment. Your support is what allows us to keep making these long and meaningful episodes for you.
To understand today's question about China and the US, we need to look back at history. The idea of a superpower became popular during the 20th century, especially after the Second World War. Before that, there were powerful empires like Britain, France, or Spain, but after 1945, the United States became the strongest economic and military power in the world. This was the result of many factors: its strong industry, its large population, and its position after the war.
That is right, Adam. At the end of World War II, many countries in Europe and Asia were badly damaged. Their cities, industries, and economies were destroyed. But the United States came out of the war stronger. Its factories were working, its economy was growing, and it had the ability to lead the rebuilding of the world. That is why the US played such a big role in creating institutions like the United Nations, the World Bank, and later NATO. These organizations gave the US a strong voice in world affairs.
Another important part of this story is the Cold War. From about 1947 until 1991, the world was divided between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The US represented democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union represented communism and central planning. This competition shaped politics, science, and culture for decades. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the United States was left as the only superpower. People started calling this period the unipolar moment, meaning one country had more power than anyone else.
And during this time, the US expanded its influence in many ways. Its economy was the largest in the world. Its military had bases across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. American companies such as Microsoft, Apple, and later Google and Facebook spread their technology and culture everywhere. Even Hollywood movies, American music, and television shows became global symbols. This cultural influence is often called soft power. It means a country can shape the world not just with weapons or money, but also with ideas, culture, and values.
Let's pause here for our listeners and highlight some useful vocabulary. First, the word superpower means a country with the ability to influence the entire world through economic, military, and cultural strength. Second, soft power refers to the influence that comes from culture, ideas, and values. And third, unipolar means one center of power, as in the world after the Cold War when the United States was clearly in the lead. These words are important for understanding international relations in English.
That is a great explanation, Adam. And I want to add one more point. The leadership of the United States was not only about power. It was also about building systems that connected countries together. For example, The US supported global trade through the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, which later became the World Trade Organization. It also helped establish the International Monetary Fund. These systems made the US the center of the global economy. For many years, people believed the US would continue to lead forever.
However, history shows us that no superpower lasts forever without challenges. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, and many others were once dominant, but eventually lost influence. The United States has been the leading power for more than 70 years, but as we will see in the next sections, new challenges are rising. China is the most important of these challenges. But before we talk about China, it is important for our listeners to see how the U.S. built its leadership step by step, and why it was able to influence so much of the modern world.
Yes, and it is also interesting for English learners to see how language is connected to power. English became the global language of business, science, and diplomacy because of America's position after World War II. When the US grew stronger, its language also became stronger. That is one reason why you, dear listeners, are learning English today. It shows how global politics and language are deeply connected. This is why understanding history is not only about the past, it also explains the world we live in now.
So to summarize this historical background, after World War II, the United States became the strongest country because it had the largest economy, a powerful military, and the ability to lead global institutions. During the Cold War, it competed with the Soviet Union, but after 1991, the U.S. was left as the only global superpower. This period made the U.S. central to world trade culture and technology. But as history teaches us, power is never permanent, and new competitors always appear. Today, that competitor is China.
And dear listeners, this is where we connect back to our big question. Can China replace the US? Understanding the US story helps us see what China needs to do to reach that level. It also helps us compare the two countries more clearly. In the next part of our podcast, we will look closely at China's economic rise and how it has changed the global balance of power in the last 40 years. But before we move forward, think about this. What made the US so powerful in the first place? Was it its economy, its culture, its military, or its leadership?
Now that we have talked about how the U.S. became the world's leading superpower, let us turn to China. The story of China's economic rise is one of the most remarkable transformations in modern history. In the late 1970s, China was still a very poor country with a closed economy. Most people worked in agriculture, and the government controlled nearly every aspect of production. But in 1978, under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping, China began a series of reforms that opened its economy to the world.
Those reforms were extremely important. Deng Xiaoping introduced a policy that was sometimes called socialism with Chinese characteristics. This meant that China kept its political system under the Communist Party, but it allowed more private businesses, foreign investment, and free market practices. Step by step, China moved from being a closed, planned economy to a more open, market-oriented one. These changes created opportunities for rapid growth, and in the following decades, China became known as the factory of the world.
That phrase, the factory of the world, is very accurate. By focusing on manufacturing, China became the largest producer of goods like electronics, clothes, furniture, and machinery. Companies from the US, Europe, and Asia moved their production to China because labor costs were lower and the supply chains were strong. This made China the center of global trade. By the early 2000s, when China joined the World Trade Organization, it was already on the path to becoming the world's second-largest economy.
And let's not forget the numbers. In 1980, China's GDP was only about 191 billion US dollars. Today, it is more than $18 trillion, making it the second-largest economy in the world, just behind the United States. Hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty during this time. In fact, the World Bank calls China's economic transformation the fastest poverty reduction in history. This is one reason why many experts believe China could one day surpass the United States in overall economic size.
But economic size is not the only factor. What makes China powerful is also its trade relationships. China has built strong connections through exports and imports with countries all over the world. It is now the biggest trading partner for more than 120 countries, including large economies like Germany, Brazil, and Japan. This gives China influence, because when you depend on a country for trade, you also pay attention to its policies and decisions. This is another way China has expanded its global reach.
That is true. And trade has also allowed China to invest abroad. One famous example is the Belt and Road Initiative, which started in 2013. This project invests in roads, railways, ports, and other infrastructure in Asia, Africa, and Europe. The goal is to create new trade routes and connect China more closely with other regions. Supporters say this brings development and opportunities, but critics say it can also make other countries too dependent on China. Either way, it shows how China uses its economy to build influence worldwide.
Another key part of China's rise is technology. In the 1990s and 2000s, China was known mainly for producing cheap goods. But in the last 15 years, it has made huge investments in research, innovation, and high technology. Companies like Huawei, Tencent, Alibaba, and BYD are now competing with American giants in areas like telecommunications, e-commerce, and electric vehicles. China is also leading in fields such as 5G, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. These technological strengths give China more power in shaping the future.
Yes, and technology connects to another important factor: urbanization. As China's economy grew, millions of people moved from rural areas to cities. This created large modern cities like Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen, which became hubs of finance and innovation. Urbanization also created a growing middle class, people who could afford to buy more products, travel abroad, and invest in education. This growing consumer market makes China not only a producer of goods, but also a powerful buyer, which strengthens its position in global trade.
For English learners, let's highlight a few useful terms here. First, GDP means gross domestic product, which is the total value of goods and services produced in a country. Second, trade partner means another country that you buy from and sell to. Third, innovation refers to creating new ideas, products, or technologies. These are important words when talking about economies, and they will help you join conversations about global issues in English.
That is a great point, Adam. And I think it is important to remember that China's rise is not only about numbers, it is also about confidence. Many Chinese people today believe that their country is returning to the position it once had in history. For centuries, China was one of the world's richest civilizations. The last 200 years were difficult, but now many people in China see this growth as a return to greatness. This idea is sometimes called the Chinese dream, a vision of national strength and pride.
At the same time, China's rise has created debates in the world. Some countries welcome China's growth because it means new markets and new opportunities. But others worry that China's growing power could challenge the current world order led by the US. For example, disputes over trade, technology, and territory in the South China Sea show how China's rise creates both cooperation and competition. Understanding these debates helps us see why people ask if China will replace the US as the next superpower.
So, dear listeners, what we see here is a transformation that is almost unbelievable. In just 40 years, China went from a poor, isolated country to a global economic powerhouse. It built factories, trade networks, modern cities, and technology companies that are changing the world. But the question remains, is economic power enough to replace the US as a superpower? Or do we also need to look at military strength, political influence, and other forms of power? That is what we will discuss in the next part of this podcast.
Now that we have explored China's economic rise, let us turn to another key question: military power. When we talk about a superpower, we cannot ignore the role of the military. Economic strength allows a country to grow, but military power allows it to protect its interests and influence global security. The United States has long been known for having the most powerful military in the world, but China has been expanding its own forces rapidly. So let us compare the two.
Yes, Adam. To start with, the United States spends more money on defense than any other country. In fact, according to recent reports, the US defense budget is around $850 billion a year. This is larger than the combined military budgets of the next several countries, including China, Russia, and India. This spending allows the US to maintain a global network of bases, advanced aircraft carriers, nuclear weapons, and high-tech systems. The US military is not just large, it is global in its reach.
That is an important point, Julia. The US has military bases in more than 70 countries. This means that if a crisis happens anywhere in the world, the US can usually respond quickly. Its Navy can patrol all major oceans, and its Air Force can project power across continents. This global presence is what makes the US not only a strong country, but also a true superpower. The ability to project power far from home is something that very few nations can do, and it is one of the key reasons why the US still leads.
China, on the other hand, has been increasing its military spending dramatically. Today, its defense budget is around $225 billion, making it the second largest in the world. While this is far smaller than the US budget, it is still impressive. China has focused on modernizing its army, navy, and air force. It has built new aircraft carriers, advanced missiles, cyber capabilities, and space technology. Most importantly, China has built strong military power in its own region, especially in the South China Sea and near Taiwan.
For English learners, it is useful to understand the difference between regional power and global power. A regional power is strong in its own area, like China in East Asia. A global power, like the United States, has influence everywhere. China's military is very powerful in Asia, but it is still building the ability to project force far beyond its borders. The US, in contrast, has been able to fight wars in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, showing its global reach. This is a key difference between the two.
Another important idea here is the balance between hard power and soft power. Hard power means using military force or economic pressure to achieve goals. Soft power means using culture, diplomacy, and values to persuade others. The US has long had both. Its military is unmatched, but its culture, universities, and democratic values also attract people. China is very strong in hard power in its region, but it is still developing soft power on a global scale. Many countries respect China's economy, but remain cautious about its political system.
That is a very good distinction, Julia. Let's also talk about technology. The US military is known for advanced weapon systems, stealth aircraft, drones, nuclear submarines, and satellite networks. It invests heavily in research and development to stay ahead. China has made big progress here too, especially in missile systems and cyber warfare. Some experts even say that in certain areas, like hypersonic missiles, China may be ahead of the US. This shows that the competition is not only about size, but also about innovation.
Yes, and China has been very strategic about this. Instead of trying to copy the US in every area, China focuses on areas where it can gain an advantage. For example, it has invested heavily in anti-ship missiles that could target US aircraft carriers in the Pacific. It has also developed strong cyber capabilities that can be used in modern warfare. So even if the US is stronger overall, China is building tools that could make it more difficult for the US to use its military power freely in Asia.
Another term for our listeners is deterrence. Deterrence means discouraging an enemy from taking action by showing that the cost would be too high. For example, China may not have a larger navy than the US, but if it can threaten US ships with powerful missiles, it can deter the US from intervening in its region. This is part of the strategy we see today. China wants to make sure it can protect its borders and influence its neighborhood, even if it cannot yet compete with the US everywhere in the world.
That is exactly right. And while the US is still the dominant military power, the rise of China's military is changing the balance in Asia. For countries like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and India, this creates both opportunities and concerns. Some of them want to benefit from trade with China, but they also want security guarantees from the US. This creates what we call a strategic balance, where countries must carefully decide how to deal with both superpowers. For English learners, this is another useful term: strategic balance.
So, what does this mean for our big question? Can China replace the US as the next superpower? In military terms, the answer is complicated. The US still has global superiority, with the ability to operate worldwide. China is growing stronger, but most of its power is regional. However, in the long term, if China continues to invest in technology, cyber warfare, and space, it could challenge US dominance more seriously. The future may not be about one replacing the other, but about competition between two strong militaries.
That is a good way to put it, Adam. And listeners, it is important to remember that military power is not everything. A superpower must also have economic strength, cultural influence, and political leadership. The US became dominant not only because of its army, but because it built a system of alliances and international institutions. China is still working on building that kind of global network, so when we compare the two militaries, we must see it as part of a bigger picture.
So to conclude this section, the US has the largest and most global military power in the world, supported by advanced technology and a wide network of allies. China has the second largest budget and has modernized rapidly, focusing on its regional strength and new technologies. While the US remains stronger overall, China is closing the gap, at least in Asia. This sets the stage for one of the biggest questions in international relations today. How will these two powers manage their military competition in the future?
Exactly. And in our next part, we will turn to another area of competition: technology and innovation. This is where the future of power may truly be decided. Will the US continue to lead in science, space, and digital technologies, or will China become the new leader in these fields? Stay with us, because this will give us even more insight into the question: will China replace the US as the next superpower?
Now let us turn our attention to one of the most important parts of global power today: technology and innovation. In the modern world, being a superpower is not only about armies or trade, it is also about who leads in science, advanced industries, and digital progress. Artificial intelligence, 5G networks, semiconductors, and even space exploration are at the center of this competition. The United States and China both know that whoever controls these fields will shape the future.
That is absolutely correct, Adam. Let's start with artificial intelligence, often called AI. The United States has been a pioneer in this area, with companies such as Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI pushing the limits of what machines can learn and do. AI is used in healthcare, finance, transportation, and even defense. However, China has made AI a national priority. Beijing has invested billions of dollars into research, and Chinese companies like Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba are rapidly advancing in AI applications.
Yes, And one clear example is how AI is used in daily life in China. Mobile apps powered by artificial intelligence help people order food, pay bills, and even get medical advice. AI is also being used in traffic systems to manage crowded cities. The US still leads in basic research and in producing top AI scientists. But China's strength lies in applying AI quickly on a massive scale. This difference shows two models of innovation, one focused on breakthroughs, the other on real-world use.
Moving from AI to 5G technology, we can see a similar story. The United States had a head start in earlier generations of internet technology, but China has become a leader in 5G networks. The company Huawei is famous for developing advanced 5G equipment that is used in many countries around the world. Faster internet speeds, lower delays, and smart city connections all depend on this new system. The US still develops high-level research, but China has built large-scale 5G infrastructure at an incredible pace.
And that matters, because 5G is not just about faster phones. It also supports self-driving cars, advanced robotics, and the Internet of Things, where millions of devices are connected at once. If one country becomes the global supplier of this network, it gains both money and influence. That is why many nations are cautious about depending too much on Huawei, while others see it as an affordable solution. The United States wants to protect its leadership, but China's rapid progress in 5G cannot be ignored.
Another critical area is semiconductors, which are the tiny chips inside computers, smartphones, cars, and even airplanes. The US has long been the leader in semiconductor design, with companies like Intel, Nvidia, and Qualcomm. Taiwan, an American partner, produces most of the world's advanced chips through TSMC. China, however, has been trying to reduce its dependence on foreign chips. It has invested heavily in its own semiconductor industry, although it still faces challenges in producing the most advanced chips.
That is a major point, Julia. Semiconductors are sometimes called the new oil, because modern economies cannot run without them. Whoever controls chip technology controls much of the digital economy. The US has placed restrictions on selling advanced chips to China, which shows how important this area is. If China succeeds in building its own advanced semiconductor supply chain, it could challenge American leadership not only in technology, but also in economic independence.
And then we come to space exploration, which has always been a symbol of superpower strength. The United States has NASA, SpaceX, and other private companies leading a new space age. They are exploring Mars, building satellites, and even planning to send humans back to the moon. China has also made impressive progress, with the Chang'e missions landing on the moon and the Tianwen-1 mission reaching Mars. China now has its own space station, Tiangong, which shows its ambition to be a leader in space science.
Space is important not only for science, but also for defense and communication. Satellites control GPS, internet, weather forecasting, and even military systems. The United States still has the largest and most advanced space network, but China is catching up quickly. In the future, space could become another area where superpowers compete, just like land and sea in the past. Innovation in this field will decide which country has the most control over the next frontier.
When we step back, we can see how technology is shaping power in the 21st century. The United States has an advantage with Silicon Valley, a place where creativity, talent, and investment come together to produce world-changing innovations. From Apple to Google to Tesla, these companies have shaped global culture and daily life. China, however, has its own giants like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba, which dominate Asian markets and are expanding worldwide. This creates a balance that is changing the global picture.
So the question becomes, will innovation decide the next superpower? History suggests that it will. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution made Britain powerful. In the 20th century, technology and science helped the United States become the leader. Now, in the 21st century, artificial intelligence, digital networks, semiconductors, and space exploration may decide who leads next. Both the US and China know this, which is why they invest so much in research and technology.
Listeners, what we are really seeing is that the race for innovation is not only about creating wealth, but also about shaping the future. Every advancement in AI, 5G, chips, or space changes how nations communicate, trade, and even defend themselves. The United States and China are both strong, but their strengths are different. The outcome of this competition may not be one winner and one loser. Instead, the world might enter a time when two technological giants share influence.
Now that we have discussed technology and innovation, it is important to look at political systems and how they affect global influence. The United States has a democratic system where power is divided among different branches, and elections allow citizens to choose their leaders. This system encourages transparency, accountability, and participation. China, in contrast, has a one-party system led by the Communist Party, where political decisions are centralized and citizens do not vote in competitive elections.
That is correct, Adam. The difference in political systems affects how each country interacts with the world. In the United States, democracy allows for debates, public opinion, and a free press. This can sometimes slow down decision-making, but it also builds trust among allies. China's one-party system allows for faster decision-making and long-term planning because the government does not face political competition. This gives China the ability to implement large projects quickly, but it also raises questions about individual freedoms.
Exactly, Julia. Political systems also influence global institutions. The United States has been a key leader in organizations like the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, NATO, and the G20. Through these institutions, the U.S. can promote its values, build alliances, and influence international rules. China participates in these organizations as well, but it has also created new frameworks like BRICS and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, aiming to expand its influence in ways that reflect its own interests.
That is an excellent observation. Let's talk more about BRICS, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. China has become a leading voice in this group, promoting economic cooperation among developing nations. Similarly, the Belt and Road Initiative, which we discussed in the previous sections, allows China to shape global trade, investment, and infrastructure. These strategies help China gain influence, even in countries that traditionally relied on Western support.
Another aspect to consider is soft power. Soft power is the ability to influence others through attraction, rather than coercion. The United States has strong soft power through Hollywood movies, music, universities, and its promotion of the English language. Millions of students study in U.S. universities, American culture spreads globally, and English remains the primary language of international business and science. These are all ways the U.S. extends its influence peacefully and effectively.
Yes, and China is working hard to increase its soft power as well. Confucius institutes around the world teach Chinese language and culture. Chinese movies, television shows, and music are gaining international audiences, although they are not yet as globally dominant as Hollywood. Additionally, Chinese investments in media, scholarships, and cultural exchanges aim to build a positive image abroad. Soft power is not only about culture, but also about shaping perceptions and international relationships.
Political systems also affect credibility and trust in global leadership. Many countries trust the United States democratic system because they can see checks and balances and accountability. This makes partnerships easier in multilateral organizations. China's one-party system allows for consistency and long-term strategies. But some countries remain cautious about political transparency and human rights issues. Both systems have strengths and weaknesses, which shape their influence differently.
Another factor is how global crises are managed. During economic crises, pandemics, or climate change negotiations, both the US and China play important roles. The US often works through existing international organizations, while China sometimes sets up new mechanisms or uses bilateral agreements to achieve its goals. This demonstrates how political structure and strategy affect global leadership. Countries observe not only a nation's power, but also how it uses that power responsibly.
For English learners, some useful terms here include one-party system, which means a political system dominated by a single political party, and soft power, which we mentioned earlier. Another important term is multilateral organizations, which refers to international groups where multiple countries collaborate, like the United Nations or the World Trade Organization. Understanding these terms helps learners discuss global politics more confidently in English.
So, when we combine political systems, participation in international organizations, and soft power, we see that superpower influence is multidimensional. The United States leads through democracy, alliances, and cultural attraction, while China is growing through centralized decision-making, infrastructure projects, economic partnerships, and increasing cultural visibility. Both countries use a combination of hard and soft power to project influence worldwide.
Exactly, Julia. The comparison shows that global influence is not just about armies or GDP. It is also about credibility, relationships, and culture. A country with economic and military power can still struggle to shape global opinion if it lacks soft power. Conversely, a country with strong culture, language, and diplomacy can have a disproportionate impact. Both the US and China understand this and are investing in ways to strengthen their global presence.
In conclusion, political systems and soft power play a critical role in determining which country has influence on the world stage. While the US uses democracy, alliances, and culture to maintain its leadership, China is leveraging centralized control, economic strategy, and cultural initiatives to expand its reach. Listeners, this reminds us that superpower status is not only about strength or wealth, but also about trust, reputation, and how countries attract and inspire others.
And that sets the stage for our next section, where we will explore economic influence in more depth, comparing trade relationships, foreign investment, and financial systems. Understanding political systems and soft power helps us see the bigger picture of how China and the United States compete for global leadership. While the United States has maintained global leadership for decades, it faces significant challenges today. One major issue is internal polarization. American politics has become increasingly divided, with people on opposite sides of the political spectrum often unable to compromise. This polarization affects not only domestic governance, but also international credibility. When the world sees disagreement at home, it can reduce confidence in the US as a consistent global leader.
That is very true, Adam. Alongside political divisions, the United States also faces economic challenges. National debt has grown to levels that worry economists and policymakers. Managing such a large debt limits the government's ability to invest in infrastructure, education, or defense. High debt can also affect global perceptions of financial stability. Countries that rely on the US dollar may question long-term fiscal resilience if internal debt becomes unmanageable.
Another issue is inequality. Wealth and income gaps have widened over the past decades, creating social tension and reducing opportunities for millions of Americans. Inequality can weaken social cohesion, make policy decisions more difficult, and even reduce economic growth. When citizens feel left behind, it can create unrest and distract political leaders from focusing on global strategy. For the U.S. to maintain its superpower status, addressing domestic inequality is just as important as maintaining military strength.
You are right, Adam. Beyond economics and inequality, the United States is experiencing what some call foreign policy fatigue. After decades of involvement in conflicts around the world, including Iraq, Afghanistan, and interventions in Europe and the Middle East, Americans are increasingly hesitant to engage in new foreign conflicts. This reluctance can limit US influence abroad, as allies may doubt the willingness to commit troops or resources, and rivals may see opportunities to expand their influence.
These internal challenges are connected to global leadership. A country may be strong militarily or economically, but if domestic issues dominate its attention, it may be less effective internationally. Internal divisions, debt, and inequality all reduce flexibility and resilience. For English learners, this is a good moment to highlight some vocabulary. Decline refers to a reduction in strength or quality, competition means rivalry or struggle for advantage, and resilience is the ability to recover quickly from difficulties. These terms are essential when discussing international relations.
Exactly, Adam. Let's explore how these challenges affect competition with other countries, particularly China. If the US struggles internally, it may not have the resources or political unity to compete effectively on trade, technology, or military initiatives. China, with centralized decision-making, can act more decisively. Even though the US remains strong, internal difficulties may slow its response to new global challenges and reduce its perceived influence in key regions.
Another factor is long-term economic trends. While the U.S. economy is large and innovative, debt, inflation, and social spending pressures may affect growth. Countries that depend on the U.S. dollar or invest in American markets could worry about fiscal stability. Economic difficulties at home can reduce the ability to fund global initiatives, whether it is military operations, development aid, or international programs. This shows that internal health and external power are closely linked.
Social cohesion is equally important. When a society is divided, it is harder to maintain public support for global engagement. Polarization can create uncertainty about US foreign policy. Allies may be unsure whether commitments will continue over time, and adversaries may test limits, knowing that decision-making could be slowed by domestic debate. Maintaining unity at home is therefore a strategic advantage on the global stage.
For English learners, another useful term is fatigue, which we mentioned earlier. It means extreme tiredness or a lack of energy, and in this context, it describes a country's hesitation to continue long-term foreign involvement. We also discussed inequality, which refers to unfair differences in wealth, opportunities, or rights. By understanding these words, learners can describe complex political and economic situations in English.
So when we look at America's challenges, we see a combination of political division, economic debt, inequality, and foreign policy fatigue. Each of these factors influences global perception and limits flexibility. Even a historically dominant country must manage its internal health to maintain leadership abroad. In this sense, domestic policy and international power are deeply interconnected, and ignoring one affects the other.
That's right, Julia. But it is important to emphasize resilience. Despite these challenges, the U.S. has demonstrated the ability to recover from economic crises, political gridlock, and social tension in the past. Innovation, strong institutions, and an engaged civil society give the country the capacity to overcome obstacles. Resilience ensures that even when decline appears possible, a country can rebuild and maintain influence over time.
In summary, the challenges facing the United States are serious but not insurmountable. Polarization, debt, inequality, and foreign policy fatigue can affect global leadership, but awareness and strategic action can preserve strength. Listeners, understanding these challenges helps us see why some experts ask whether China might rise as a co-superpower or even surpass the US in the future. Vocabulary like decline, competition, and resilience helps learners talk about these complex ideas in English confidently.
And with that understanding of internal challenges, we can move to our next section, where we will examine challenges facing China. comparing their strengths and weaknesses to those of the United States. By seeing both sides, listeners will have a complete picture of global competition today. Now that we have explored the challenges facing the United States, let us turn to China. While China has grown rapidly in recent decades, it faces significant obstacles that could affect its rise as a superpower. One of the major issues is economic growth. After years of double-digit growth, China's economy has started to slow. Slower growth can impact employment, government revenues, and the ability to invest in infrastructure, research, and global projects.
That is true, Adam. Alongside a slowing economy, China faces demographic challenges. The country's population is aging rapidly due to decades of the one-child policy. This creates a shrinking workforce and increased pressure on healthcare and social services. A smaller workforce may reduce productivity and innovation, which are critical for maintaining economic and military power. For a country aiming to become a superpower, demographic decline is a serious concern.
Another related issue is the aging population. Not only is the number of working-age people declining, but the number of elderly citizens is rising. This creates what economists call a dependency ratio problem. More resources must be spent caring for older citizens, which reduces the funds available for investment in technology, education, or global initiatives. An aging society may also be less flexible and innovative, slowing long-term progress.
In addition to economic and demographic pressures, political control presents challenges. China's one-party system allows for centralized decision-making and long-term planning, but it can also create rigidity. Limited political freedom and tight control over information may reduce innovation and suppress dissenting ideas. Furthermore, global partners sometimes view this political system with caution, which can limit China's ability to build trust and alliances internationally.
Yes, Julia. Trust is a critical factor in international relations. While China is economically powerful, other nations sometimes hesitate to fully align with Beijing due to concerns about transparency, human rights, and political influence. This global suspicion can limit China's soft power and reduce the effectiveness of initiatives like the Belt and Road. A superpower must not only have strength, but also the credibility to gain cooperation from others.
Another point to consider is global perception and influence. China's rapid rise has caused both interest and concern among other countries. Nations often welcome investment, but may worry about dependence or political influence. For example, some countries have debated the terms of Chinese infrastructure projects or 5G technology deployment. Building global trust is a slow process, and China's political model can sometimes make it more difficult.
China also faces competition from other rising powers, regional conflicts, and trade tensions. The United States, European countries, India, and Japan are all important players in global politics. China's ability to achieve superpower status depends not only on its own growth, but also on how effectively it manages relationships with these countries. Internal and external pressures create a complex environment for Beijing's leadership ambitions.
For English learners, some key terms here are helpful. Demographic decline refers to a shrinking or aging population. Dependency ratio refers to the number of people relying on support compared to those working, and global suspicion describes doubts or caution from other nations about a country's intentions. Understanding these terms helps learners discuss China's challenges accurately in English.
Another challenge is economic sustainability. While China has enormous reserves and a strong industrial base, maintaining high growth rates becomes harder as wages rise, debt increases, and export growth slows. A slowing economy reduces the government's flexibility in global projects, defense spending, and technology investments. Economic stability is crucial for long-term influence, and any significant downturn could impact China's superpower ambitions.
It is also important to note that these challenges do not mean China will fail. The country still has massive resources, a large population, advanced technology, and strong political direction. But, like the United States, it faces obstacles that could slow or complicate its path to global leadership. Both superpowers must manage internal pressures while maintaining influence abroad, showing that no country is without challenges in today's interconnected world.
That is an important balance to remember. Comparing the US and China, we see that both face internal and external challenges, though the nature of these obstacles is different. The US deals with polarization, debt, and social inequality, while China faces demographic decline, political control, and international suspicion. Understanding both sets of challenges gives a more complete picture of global competition.
Exactly, Adam. By examining these issues, we realize that superpower status is not guaranteed. Strength in one area, like the economy or military, is not enough. Countries must also manage internal stability, public trust, and international credibility. For learners, discussing these challenges introduces terms like obstacles, sustainability, and trust, which are very useful for understanding global politics in English.
In conclusion, China's rise is impressive, but slowing economic growth, aging demographics, centralized political control, and global skepticism create challenges. While Beijing has the resources to continue expanding influence, it must navigate these obstacles carefully. As we have seen with the United States, no superpower is without vulnerabilities, and both nations will need resilience and strategy to maintain or achieve leadership in the 21st century.
And this sets the stage for our next section, where we will compare both powers in terms of global influence and the potential future balance of power. Understanding challenges on both sides helps us see the complexity of international competition and the many factors that shape the world order.
Now that we have analyzed the challenges and strengths of both the United States and China, it is important to consider possible future scenarios. The world could take different paths depending on how these countries manage their power, their domestic challenges, and their relationships with other nations. One possibility is a bipolar world, where the US and China emerge as the two dominant powers, each leading its own sphere of influence.
That is true, Adam. In a bipolar scenario, the world might see a kind of balance, with countries aligning more closely with either the United States or China. Trade, technology, military alliances, and international institutions could be divided along these lines. Such a world could be stable in some ways, but also risky, because tension between two superpowers might increase the chances of conflicts, both economic and political.
Another possibility is a multipolar world, where several countries share global influence. India, the European Union, Japan, Brazil, and other regional powers could play significant roles alongside the US and China. In this scenario, global decisions would require negotiation among multiple leaders and countries, which could reduce the dominance of any single nation. Multipolarity may encourage cooperation, but it can also create complexity and unpredictability.
That is an excellent point. A multipolar world reflects the reality of global interdependence. Many issues like climate change, pandemics, and trade require collaboration beyond two countries. Smaller nations can gain more influence by working together or forming regional alliances. English learners should note terms like multipolar, meaning multiple centers of power, and bipolar, meaning two dominant powers. Understanding these terms helps in discussing future global politics.
Another potential future is one of cooperation rather than competition. While it may sound idealistic, countries could focus on solving global challenges together. Issues like climate change, global health, poverty, and technological standards require collaboration. If the United States and China can find ways to cooperate rather than compete aggressively, the world could benefit from shared progress, and smaller nations might feel more secure and included.
Cooperation, however, is challenging. Trust must be built, and both sides must balance domestic interests with international goals. Historical rivalries, economic competition, and political differences make this difficult. Yet, global crises sometimes create opportunities for collaboration. For example, pandemics or climate emergencies may force countries to coordinate responses, share knowledge, and act collectively. Cooperation may not be easy, but it is possible.
For learners, a few useful terms in this discussion include cooperation, meaning working together, and competition, meaning striving for advantage. Another term is scenario, which refers to a possible future situation. Using these words helps English learners analyze complex topics like international relations and predict outcomes logically. Thinking critically in English about global trends can improve both language skills and world awareness.
Another important factor is technology. Both cooperation and competition will be shaped by innovations in artificial intelligence, semiconductors, space exploration, and green energy. Countries that lead in these areas may have more leverage in negotiations and decision-making. At the same time, shared technology standards and research collaborations could create mutual benefits. The challenge will be to balance national advantage with global responsibility.
Economics also plays a role in shaping future scenarios. Trade relationships, supply chains, and investment patterns connect countries in ways that make isolation or unilateral dominance difficult. Even in a bipolar world dominated by the US and China, global interdependence will require coordination. Disruptions in trade or finance could affect multiple nations, showing that cooperation is often not only ethical but practical.
Another critical point is military influence. While both superpowers maintain strong armed forces, a purely competitive scenario could escalate tensions or create arms races. On the other hand, confidence-building measures, arms control agreements, and multinational security dialogues could reduce conflict and encourage cooperation. Learners can note the term arms race, meaning competition to build more or better weapons, which is important in understanding international relations.
So, listeners, the future may be shaped by choices made today. Countries can choose cooperation, competition, or a mix of both. Observing how the United States and China respond to domestic challenges, global opportunities, and crises will help us predict which scenario is more likely. Critical thinking in English is important here. Analyzing evidence, comparing options, and imagining consequences are all skills that can improve both language ability and understanding of global affairs.
In conclusion, future scenarios could include a bipolar world dominated by the US and China, a multipolar world with several powerful nations sharing influence, or a cooperative world solving global challenges together. Each path has opportunities and risks. For learners, thinking critically and using vocabulary like cooperation, competition, scenario, and resilience allows you to discuss these complex issues confidently in English while reflecting on how global power may evolve in the 21st century.
And with this understanding of potential futures, we are ready to move to our final section, where we will reflect on lessons for both nations and for learners. Considering these scenarios helps us understand not just international relations, but also how to use language to think critically about the world. As we come to the final part of our podcast, it is time to reflect on what the US-China rivalry really means for the world. We have examined the strengths and challenges of both nations, including their economies, technology, military, political systems, and global influence. Today's discussion shows that understanding superpower dynamics is not only about comparing numbers or armies, but also about observing how these countries shape global systems that affect all of us.
That's right, Adam. One key insight is that the rivalry impacts the global economy. Trade relationships, investments, and supply chains are deeply connected to the policies and decisions of both the United States and China. When one country adjusts its economic strategy, it can ripple across continents, affecting jobs, prices, and growth in countries far away. Learners can see how economic interdependence is a crucial factor in global stability.
Another area influenced by this rivalry is technology. AI, semiconductors, 5G, space exploration, and green energy are not only areas of competition, but also opportunities for collaboration. Innovations in these fields affect industries worldwide, from healthcare to transportation to energy. Countries that follow these developments must adapt quickly, and students can learn English by reading or discussing technology news, understanding terms like innovation, infrastructure, and digital economy.
Education is also affected. Global universities, research collaborations, and language learning programs are influenced by superpower competition. American universities attract international students, while China increasingly invests in global educational initiatives and scholarships. This rivalry encourages learners to improve their English and other skills to access opportunities worldwide. Language is a tool for participation in science, business, and international dialogue, connecting individuals to the global stage.
However, it is important to maintain a balanced perspective. This is not simply about who wins or who loses. The world benefits when countries share responsibility for global issues. Climate change, pandemics, cybersecurity, and international trade disputes require cooperation. A competitive mindset alone can create tension and instability, whereas collaboration can generate solutions that benefit multiple nations and populations.
Listeners, a key lesson is that power comes with responsibility. Superpowers like the United States and China influence the rules, standards, and opportunities in the world. Their choices affect smaller countries, economies, and international systems. English learners can use this understanding to reflect on global events and participate in discussions. Vocabulary like responsibility, interdependence, cooperation, and innovation can help express these complex ideas clearly in English.
Another insight is the importance of critical thinking. Observing global events, comparing strategies, and predicting potential outcomes encourages learners to analyze information carefully. By reflecting in English, students not only improve their language skills, but also develop the ability to understand international relations and global challenges. Thinking critically allows learners to participate in debates, write essays, and discuss current events with confidence.
Moreover, we see that both countries face obstacles and opportunities. The United States has challenges like political polarization, economic debt, and social inequality, while China contends with demographic decline, global suspicion, and political control. Both nations must manage these issues while maintaining influence abroad. For learners, this illustrates that global power is complex and multidimensional, and success depends on strategy, resilience, and cooperation.
For students, the main takeaway is that understanding global rivalry is not about picking a side. It is about observing trends, analyzing strengths and weaknesses, and recognizing shared responsibility. Language learning is part of this process because being able to discuss, debate, and write about world affairs in English expands your understanding and prepares you for global participation. Knowledge and communication are as important as power in today's world.
Finally, the US-China dynamic reminds us that the world is interconnected. Decisions in one country affect economies, technologies, and societies worldwide. Superpower competition can drive innovation and progress, but it also creates risks. Reflecting in English, learners can think critically about these issues, ask questions, and form informed opinions. Understanding global dynamics is not only academic, it is practical, shaping how we live, work, and learn in a connected world.
In conclusion, the rise of China and the enduring power of the United States present opportunities, challenges, and lessons for everyone. Global leadership is not just about dominance, but about shared responsibility, innovation, and cooperation. For English learners, this discussion provides insights into international relations, introduces important vocabulary, and encourages critical thinking. By learning to reflect on global affairs in English, students become active participants in the world, not just observers.
So, listeners, as we end today's podcast, remember that understanding superpowers is more than numbers or military strength. It is about economics, technology, culture, education, and responsibility. The future will depend on choices made by leaders and citizens alike. Use your English to explore, analyze, and discuss these global issues. The world is complex, and your ability to think and communicate in English makes you part of this conversation.
Thank you for joining us today on the English Globe. We hope this discussion has inspired you to reflect on global power, consider the responsibilities of nations, and practice your English by thinking critically. The world is evolving, and your knowledge, curiosity, and language skills can help you understand it better and participate actively.